Hey guys, and welcome to episode 24 in this ongoing series. Let me know if there are any sound issues. I'm doing something a little bit different tonight, and hopefully, if it works, then we can do it again. Everything okay in terms of the sound? Just let me know so far. Is the sound okay? Stephanie, good to see you. It's been a while since you've been here, but I think you've been spending time with your family. That's always a good thing. 94 degrees in Connecticut. That is pretty warm. Amy Hall, good to see other members here as well. Actually, good to see you. Uh, Paddy, good to see you as well. And then we've got a couple of subscribers. Lisa Stokes, good to see you as well. So the poll in this episode is quite an interesting one, I think. Who is the most creative artist? Elvis, Michael Jackson, obviously both musicians. And then so far, the majority of you saying Vincent van Gogh, which I think is really, really interesting. I think what's quite interesting is how creatively Van Gogh lived and also the arc of his story, but we'll get to that. Is the sound so far good and is it fine? Karina from Austria says it's scorching hot, almost 90 degrees Fahrenheit at 9 p.m. Wow, that is pretty hot. Stephanie says we were on vacation. Okay, so I'm going to play you a little clip from a excellent documentary called Painted with Words, and that's going to catch us up a little bit to where we are actually right now. Okay, so here we go. This. Okay, so what we have there is Benedict Cumberbatch. He's acting in a excellent. I'm not sure if it's a documentary or a movie. I guess it's a little bit of both. And he's basically dramatizing a lot of the letters, right? And so this part right here is dealing with the period that we've sort of left out, the period where he where Scene actually leaves him, and you've just found out why that happens is because Theo eventually has enough. You saw that dramatized in a very elegant way. He crumples up a letter of Vincent's and throws it aside. Now, that probably didn't happen. I mean, we've got all of Vincent van Gogh's letters still, but nevertheless, I think it captures how Theo felt. But the point is, when Theo stopped sending money, then Scene turned her back on Vincent, right? That was really the situation. Scene was really in it for the money, kind of thing. So, what happens after that? What happens after that particular point? By the way, Terry Dean says sounds good. Okay, hopefully it is for everybody. So let's go on to a little bit further into this. As you can see, this is Benedict Cumberbatch playing the role of Vincent van Gogh. But living in such an isolated place, loneliness soon bore down on him. So it's impossible not to. Actually says can't hear the sound well on the movie. Well, then I'll just stop doing that. I'll stop playing the movie then. So the I'll have to explain the effect for those of you who can't hear it, despite my efforts. It is really incredible when you have a great actor and a proper production putting together the letters, putting together the art, going into Holland and looking at the actual landscapes, the actual subject matter, and then adding to that music. It's impossible not to be deeply moved by all of these layers put together in an expert way. So if you want to experience the full evocative effect, make sure you get hold of Painted with Words. That's one documentary that's particularly good. Now I'm going to play another clip a little bit later on, and then we'll and that's dealing with another aspect, and that is from 19 minutes. But I'm not going to play it right now. Let's just see. I think it's round about there. So something I want you guys to think about as we go through the next letter is, what do you think is going to be the cause of a lot of discomfort between Vincent van Gogh and his parents and in the other direction, right? And this requires, especially the members who've been following, right? This requires you guys to use the insight that you've hopefully picked up along the way. So I want you guys to think about, you can discuss it in chat as we go along, is this whole idea of what has changed since Vincent van Gogh left home and now that he's returning home, right? That's something we're going to address there. Okay, so now we're going to go to the letters. This is basically a dramatization of his parents. So there you can see an actor playing Vincent's father and his mother, and you can see the sort of well-to-do but also sort of uptight culture that Van Gogh has got to deal with. And he's the opposite of that. That makes sense, right? And remember, he's just come from this really almost morally depraved scenario with this pregnant prostitute. And so that is where we find ourselves now in December 1883. He's also in a state where he's trying to make up his mind, am I going to continue being an artist? Can I continue being an artist? And Theo, what do you think about it? And he's kind of just adjusting to everything, right? He's also got to figure out who's going to be paying for his upkeep, because he's kind of living on the charity of his family at this point, right? Yeah, Susan says his promiscuous lifestyle. Thanks a lot for putting the link there. So Stephanie's just put a link to my book on Amazon. So it's basically this book. It's The Murder of Vincent van Gogh. I've been checking it almost every day, waiting for it to hit 30 ratings or 30 reviews. It just doesn't seem to be happening, but touch wood, we'll get there eventually. Okay, so the letter we're dealing with here, 6 to 7 December 1883. It's really, I think, the second letter he writes in December, and the second one from Nuenen. So it's the third one. So this is the second letter that he writes since arriving in Nuenen, and he writes it on the 6th to 7th December 1883. So I think I'm just going to bring this up a little bit bigger. And oh, first one was to the documentary. Okay. Here's the one, here's the link to my book. Anyway, well done on both those links, Stephanie. Corinne says, I can highly recommend it. It is a gem. I hope you like my review, Nick, quite some time back. Oh, is that recommendation of the book? Thanks a lot for that. But I can highly recommend the Painted with Crows documentary. It's really, really good. Is there anyone here who's seen it? Stephanie, have you seen it? Thanks a lot. Okay. So I want you guys, again, I want you guys to think about, what do you think is going to be the main issue for Vincent van Gogh moving back home after being away for a while, right? Bear in mind the arc of his journey. You know, he's gone to the Borinage, but now he's come back and he's kind of a different person, right? What do you think is going to be the sticking point between Van Gogh and his parents, but also from his parents to him? What has changed now that is going to create this kind of sticking point? Stephanie says no, but I will. It looks very well done. It is really worth watching. It is really, really worth watching. Okay, so we're going to answer the question that I've asked you in the very next letter. So think about it. Think about it while we're going through this. So Vincent's only been at home for like a day or two or three, and he's doing a lot of soul searching. He's got to decide what to do with the rest of his life. I think at this point he's 29 years old, 29 or 30 years old, 30 years old. And so you can imagine he's 30 years old and he's thinking, what have I done with my life? I'm not married. I'm all my other people, my peers have all moved on with their lives. I'm back home, and what am I to do? And that's sort of the substance that he's dealing with in this letter. So he says, "Dear Theo, I was lying awake half the night, Theo, after I wrote you last night. I'm sick at heart about the fact that coming back after 2 years' absence, the welcome home was kind and cordial in every respect, but basically there's been no change whatsoever, not the slightest, in what I must call the most extreme blindness and ignorance as to the insight into our mutual position. And again, I feel almost unbearably disturbed and perplexed." Now, if you think about that, Van Gogh arrives home and his parents treat him with kindness. His parents treat him with every respect. And you could, in a way, argue that that is more than he actually deserves. And yet he's very disturbed by this, right? It's really an interesting response to being welcomed home with open arms, given the way he's been behaving, given everything that he's done, also given how much resources he's absorbed from family members. And so he arrives home, and although he's welcomed home after 2 years, it's like the prodigal son returns. He's actually disturbed by arriving home and finding that he has changed a great deal, but home hasn't. Home has stayed the same. And again, I must ask you, in what way do you think he's changed and home hasn't, right? Karina says it must have felt humiliating to him, definitely. I think it also felt humiliating to them. He goes on to say, the fact is that things were going extremely well until the moment when father, not just in the heat of passion, but also because he was tired of it, banished me from the house. So he's talking about what happened previously. It ought to have been understood then that this was supremely important to my success or failure, that things were made 10 times more difficult for me by this, almost impossible. So now he's actually, and it's not something he often does, but he's actually feeling feelings of regret, is thinking about the past, is thinking about the events 2 years back, right? And he is actually quite bitter and quite negative, and Van Gogh is normally not that way. But now that he's home, these feelings are sort of surfacing. Robbie Robbins says, sorry I'm late, I did not have a notification. Yeah, sorry, I didn't put anything on Patreon. I've had quite a busy day. Stephanie says he blames them then. Another thing I want to share with you as someone who is also an artist in a certain sense is that I've felt in my life I've moved around a heck of a lot, not just from A to B, but internationally. I've lived in England. I've lived in South Korea. Like for years at a time. I've traveled extensively. I've done a circuit of Australia. I've just done quite a lot of travel. But but the point is, I lived a very itinerant sort of lifestyle. I was sort of somewhere for kind of a short period of time, then I'd move and move again. And I eventually started to realize that I have to find a fixed residence if I'm going to grow in a measurable way, in a substantial way. If I keep uprooting myself, although it's good for, um, you know, stepping out into the world, getting experience, and you know, travel is a great educator. But at the same time, if you're going to grow some sort of um, career as an artist, and in my case as a writer, you need to spend enough time putting down roots that you have a room that is becomes your office. You need a place that is stable and reliable, where you can start to forget the walls around you and focus on your work, right? And it takes time to develop that sort of thing. And I've got to say, where I'm living right now allowed me to do that. And I think what you've got to give credit to Vincent's parents. Now, I say this with the benefit of hindsight, but also it's not quite as simple or as easy as what I'm going to say now. But the fact is, Vincent, from this point, did go on. By the end of his stay with his parents, he basically painted the Potato Eaters, which was a masterpiece. And he was only able to do that because he was living in the bosom, in a way, of his family. And so they created, despite things not being perfect, despite some opprobrium, despite a certain amount of rubbing one another the wrong way, he was nevertheless in an environment where his art continued to grow, right? And he went on to become the artist that he became. So he didn't go home and then his art stagnated. He sort of went home, and that created a platform that launched him into the rest of his journey. Does that make sense? So what I want to do here is give his parents credit. I don't know if he would necessarily do that, but give his parents credit for creating an environment where he could just work, where he didn't have to worry about money. And I'm not saying it's quite as simple as that. I think there were a lot of worries, there were a lot of arguments, but in the main, he was able to paint and so on without someone saying, stop painting, get a job, or whatever. He was actually able to continue painting with perhaps with some irritating things taking place, but nevertheless, he developed momentum during his stay in Nuenen, and that actually counts for a lot. Does that make sense? Terry Dean says, I can definitely relate. I've moved 21 times in my adult life. Stability, absolutely. And so stability is really important for an artist. I think you need instability as well, but I think when you're starting to produce, you need environment around you that is going to allow you to focus on what you're doing, kind of thing. Not there yet is here. Karina says his resilience never ceases to amaze me. Actually says that was true for me too. My parents basically helped me find myself, bless them. They weren't perfect, but bless them. Okay, so he goes on to say, if I'd not had the same feeling at the time, which I have now I have again, namely that notwithstanding all good intentions, notwithstanding all the kindness of the reception, notwithstanding anything you like, there is a certain hardness in father, like iron, an icy coldness, something that gives the impression of dry sand or glass or tin plate. For all his outward gentleness, if, as I said, I'd not had this feeling already, I should not have resented it so much. So he's talking about this person, right? And he's saying, although he is a good person and maybe a nice person and maybe a kind person, there's also a hardness with regard to him that Vincent is now finding he doesn't like, right? Again, I want to ask you, what do you think the main difference is between the Vincent van Gogh that's returning home and the Vincent van Gogh that left, right? Meep says, how old was he when this letter was wrote? He was 30 years old. Okay, so let's go back to the letter. So he says, now this is written in the margin. I'm not so much interested in a kind or an unkind reception. It grieves me that they do not regret what they did at the time. Now I am again in an almost unbearable state of wavering and inner struggle. So again, I want to just remind you that despite his reservations, despite him saying words like regret and it grieves him, he's going to emerge from this period as a better artist, right? But I'm just saying he arrives home on a sort of a state of tenterhooks. He's not happy to be home, but he's basically home because of the financial taps that have been turned off. He doesn't really have a choice, right? Actually says he's grown as an artist and begun to become committed. That's quite an interesting way of putting it. Turmoil in his mind, Stephanie says. He goes on to say, you understand that I should not write as I do, having undertaken the journey hither of my own free will, having been the first to swallow my pride. So there's a clue as to what he's feeling. The question is, why is he feeling it? Why is he feeling that? So he's kind of saying, if I understand him correctly, he's saying, I'm swallowing my pride, but Dad isn't. And it's not right, and Dad's quite hard in that respect. But if you think about it, he's moving back in with his parents. Why should they swallow their pride, kind of thing? Anyway, he goes on to say, if I'd now noticed some eagerness to do as the Rappards did, with the best results, and as we began here with good results too, if I had noticed that Father had also realized that he ought not to have shut his house to me, then I should have felt some confidence in the future. Nothing of all that. In Father's mind, there was not then, there is not now, the faintest shadow of a doubt that what he did was the right thing. Father does not know remorse like you and me and any man who is human. That's quite a criticism, I guess, of his old man, that his own father just seems to be unable to show remorse. So you can see he's kind of got a bit of a gripe for his father, right? He's 30 years old and he's kind of got a bit of a chip on his shoulder. And I think that's quite normal for not everyone, but for a lot of 30-year-olds. You're not supposed to, in a way, be so comfortable with your parents that you would just be happy to move home again. There is a bit of a generation gap in general, and I think if parents were totally comfortable with their offspring, and if their offspring were totally comfortable with parents and children would live together in general, and they generally don't, right? And Vincent is now old enough to be his own man, and he's also changing. He's constantly changing still, whereas his father is approaching 60 years old, and they are settled in their ways. I mean, being a pastor, his job is to almost entrench tradition and beliefs and thoughts. The idea isn't to deviate from them, it's to stick to them and to remind his congregations to do the same. Whereas Vincent is going, like if you're supposed to draw between the lines or not stray across the boundary lines, Vincent's doing exactly that. And you can imagine that in terms of the way Vincent sees the world and sees his beliefs, they are definitely in conflict with his parents, right? And you can't blame them for not being terribly happy with him, and you can't blame him for not being terribly happy with them. I mean, it's the situation that they're in. Not there yet says it's natural to gradually break away. It's the cycle of life. Karina says perhaps Vincent yearns for his father to sponsor and support him in his endeavors. I'm not sure if he does. I think he'd rather have Theo sort of look after him than his father, who seems less compassionate. But, you know, it has to be said, his father's not as cold as you might think. When Vincent's in hospital, his father goes to see him. You know, that should count for something. Meep says they do look scary. Okay, so let's go on with the letter. So he says, Father believes in his own righteousness, whereas you and I and other human creatures are imbued with the feeling that we consist of errors and efforts of the lost souls. I commiserate with people like Father. In my heart of hearts, I cannot be angry with them because I think they are more unhappy than I. Why do I think them unhappy? Because the good within them is wrongly applied, so that it acts like evil, because the light within them is black and spreads darkness, obscurity around them. So again, that's quite an indictment of his own parents. He's kind of saying, my dad and my mom, but my dad, who's a pastor, is actually spreading evil, is spreading darkness upon the planet. It seems a little bit over the top, right? I mean, it's quite a strong word to use, saying his father, who's not a criminal, who's not a gangster, his father is spreading evil, right? It seems a little bit kind of over the top. Yvonne Phillips, good to see you here. Yvonne says, Father lives by strict decrees. Vincent lives by independent trial and error. That's very well said. Well spoken. Karina says, the upright preacher couple and their bohemian son, there must be friction. Meep says, maybe his mother wanted him to hone his craft. So, again, I want you to think about it in almost a very indifferent way. What's the key reason why there's going to be sort of bumping of heads between Vincent and his parents? And the biggest clue is really looking at this picture, looking at them, and then imagining what Vincent van Gogh looks like, and you know, just almost imagining him standing next to them and imagining, is there a difference between them, right? I'm talking about in terms of optics. And if you say yes, what is that difference? So I've given you a clue there. Okay, let's continue. So you can imagine if his parents could actually read his letter to Theo, you could imagine that they would be very discouraged that their own son is calling them evil to another son of theirs, right? He goes on to say, their cordial reception grieves me. It's the second time he's saying this. He's saying, the fact that they were so kind when I arrived home, it really upsets me. It's kind of like, dude, are you trying to find something to be unhappy about, right? I mean, wouldn't it have been worse if he arrived home and they sort of had the arms folded, and were sort of wagging their fingers at him and saying, you know, we're not going to let you in this door until you sign this document or whatever. You know, wouldn't that have been worse, right? Then he says, their indulgence without acknowledging their error is, for me, perhaps worse than the error itself. So, as Stephanie said, he really is blaming them. His lot in life is all their fault. Then he says, instead of a ready understanding and a certain eager contribution to mine, indirectly their own well-being. So maybe you're right that where he says a certain eager contribution, maybe he's talking about, couldn't they have given me something, you know, and I do need it, kind of thing. He says, I feel in everything a hesitation and delay, which paralyze my own ardor and energy like a leaden atmosphere. So it could be that he's quite demanding. I need this, I need that, I need that. And you can imagine that he needs a studio and he needs furniture and he needs clothing to dress his models and he needs this and that. And he's getting a hesitant response from his parents, which is frustrating him. It's making him feel impatient, it's making him feel powerless, it's disrupting his momentum, it's making him feel doubt and hesitation, and it's really undermining his um, power. But bear in mind, he's a penniless person, so how much power does he really have, right? Susan says social dress code, religious and financial differences. You're quite close, Susan. So he goes on to say, my masculine intellect tells me that I must consider it an irrevocable, fatal fact that in the depth of our souls, Father and I are irreconcilable. That's quite again, a big statement. You know, in one paragraph he says they are evil. Now he's saying, and then another one he says, Dad cannot show remorse. Now he's saying we irreconcilable. Again, think about what a bad start this appears to be. It's like this is a really bad idea for you to go home, certainly based on this letter, right? Then he says, my compassion for Father as well as for myself says to me, irreconcilable, never. Indefinitely, forever and ever, there's the possibility of one of and one should have faith in the possibility of a decisive reconciliation. But this, why is it probable, alas, that it will turn out an illusion? Do you call this moroseness on my part? So he's trying to be, what's the word? He's trying to be objective, and he sort of puts the shoe on his brother's foot and he says, do you think I'm being unreasonable? Do you think I'm being negative or sort of depressed? Do you think I'm making too big a point of this? And I'm sure Theo would say, I don't think it's really that bad. I mean, they are giving you board and lodging kind of thing. Then he says, our life is an appalling reality, and we ourselves are infinitely driven. Things are as they are, and whether we take them more or less gloomily does not in any way alter the nature of things. I think about it this way. For instance, at night when I lie awake, or I think about it this way in the storm on the heath in the evening, in the dreary twilight. In the daytime in daily life, I sometimes look as thick-skinned as a wild boar, perhaps, and I can well understand that people find me crude. This is a very good clue to the question I've been asking you. He says, in daily life, when you see me walking around, I look thick-skinned. I look a bit like a wild boar, right? And I can understand that people find me crude. He's acknowledging it. He's saying, when you see me walking around, I kind of look like a pig. I'm a crude person. I get it, right? Not there. It says, is Vincent passing blame for his own choices? So that again, think about this person now. Imagine this person that is a bit piggish and crude. Imagine that person standing beside this couple. Look how well dressed they are. These are church folk, and they're not just church folk. His father is running a parsonage, so his father is a church leader. And look at his son. This church leader's son is this kind of crude pig, right? In his own words. I mean, in Vincent van Gogh's own words. And so you can imagine, yes, it is irreconcilable, right? Robbie Robbins says his parents are perfectionists and Vincent is not. I'm not sure if they're perfectionists, but they certainly are very righteous. And he is more casual in terms of that aspect. I think Vincent is a perfectionist and conscientious in terms of his work in certain respects as well. Good point, Paddy. Paddy says their differences make Vincent feel judged. Very good point. Yvonne says he doesn't fit the mold visually, morally, or temperamentally. So here, Vincent actually crossed out the text. So he'd written this, but he crosses it out, but you can actually still read what he's saying here. And so what he writes is, people are much like brushes. So obviously a reference to paintbrushes. Those with the finest looks are not the finest in practice, right? Again, this letter is full of criticism for his family, right? And pretty harsh criticism. He's kind of saying, you know, mom and dad are like these aren't paintbrushes, obviously they're pencils, but he's kind of saying mom and dad are like these two perfect paintbrushes, but a perfect paintbrush doesn't really execute very well when you paint. He's saying a paintbrush that does execute one is one that's been used, that is been dipped into paint and whatnot, right? It's quite an interesting analogy that he makes. It's certainly, again, not a very flattering one. Lisa Stokes says, I relate so much with him, understand how he felt. So then he goes on to say, when I was younger, I myself also thought, much more than now, that things depended on coincidence or small things or misunderstandings that were without any foundation. But getting older, I feel it more and more differently and see deeper motives. Life is a queer thing too, brother. Not quite sure what he means there. Then he says, you see how agitated my letters are. One moment I think that it can be done, the next that it cannot. One thing is clear to me, that things don't go readily, that there is no eagerness. Now, what I find really incredible about that statement, where he says, you see how agitated my letters are, in the middle of these sort of gyrations, in the middle of this struggle, Vincent is able to step away and see it for what it is. I'm agitated, and I can see that you can see that my letters are agitated. And what I'm reinforcing here, and I reinforce it over and over and over again as we go through his letters, is just what a sort of emotionally mature person he is, despite making some bad choices, despite being an oddball, despite being, in his own words, crude, right? He's nevertheless very self-aware. He's not someone who becomes emotional and gets consumed by it as a matter of course. Here he's very upset. He calls his parents evil, but he's nevertheless able to say, you know what? I think I'm quite agitated here. He also says to his brother, where does he say it? He kind of asks him, do you think I'm being overly morose, right? So he hasn't lost his sense of perspective just because he's really upset. He's aware that he's upset. And that kind of self-awareness is important for someone who's going to go on and then be accused of being mentally ill, mad, and suicidal, right? And you're going to see this mental acuity stay, the sharpness stay with him across 1884, 1885, 1886, all the way through till the end of his life. So where does the madness come in? Because surely when you're mad, you lose touch with reality. Surely when you're mentally ill, you're not very self-aware. So if he's constantly self-aware, what is his problem then? If he can talk about being upset, then if he's suicidal and is expressing everything in 900 and something letters, did he just forget to express his feelings when he was the most upset? I mean, he can share when he's not very happy. So when he was at the end of his life, did he just forget to do that? So then he goes on to say, I've decided to go and see Rappard and tell him that I myself should be agreeable to staying at home, but that notwithstanding all the advantages this would have, there's a je ne sais quoi in father which I'm beginning to look upon as incurable and which makes me listless and powerless. Well, Vincent, obviously, if you go home, you can't have a power struggle that you're going to win. The mere fact that you go home to dad as an adult means you've got to hand over your power. I mean, that's how it works. You can't go home and say, okay, I'm going to be the man of the house, dad. You do this, you do that. The mere fact of going back home is that you handing over your power. Not that Van Gogh has uh, mustered much power anyway, but I mean, that's how it feels for him. Carrie says, hi, I joined in a little late. Thank you for the kind welcome. Good to have you here, Carrie. Actually says he's beneath the wheel of societal expectations that can drive one off the deep end. That's a very good point. A lot of you are touching on very close to what I'm trying to get at. So he goes on to say, last night it was decided that I shall stay here for a time. So there is kind of uncertainty about his fate. He's uncertain what he is going to do. They're uncertain what they're going to do, but there's also a sense of, can they put up with this force of nature, and do they want to? And can they control this person that's actually a relative, right? And will he allow himself to be, right? So that's kind of like an unknown. The answer is unknown. And again, if they could read this letter, they probably would think, no, this is not going to work. Maybe we should rather have him committed or something. Paddy says Vincent was out of choices. So he goes on to say, he's talking about how it upsets him how one day they say, last night it was decided I'll stay here for a while, but then the next morning I hear, let's think it over some more. Oh, yes, sleep on it a night or so and think it over. So he's incredibly crushed and angry and resentful that they are trying to decide, like, should Vincent actually stay here with him? And maybe it's done on purpose to keep him on his toes. In other words, that he doesn't feel entitled to stay there, that he realizes it's a privilege. But I think he feels that it's really cruel, that he is in a weird way desperate and powerless and helpless. And his parents are acting kind of in a cruel way, laying down the law in a way, right? But what it really is about is trying to gain control. And it's an exchange of control. And Vincent doesn't want to give up control, but they know their son as well. Anyway, he says something about, and look at all those exclamation marks. They've been able to think over it for 2 years, or to have thought it over of their own accord as a matter of course. Anyways, so he's still, to a large extent, griping and complaining about almost 2 years of his life that, in a way, he feels is wasted. He says, 2 years, every day of which was a day of distress to me, for them, everyday life as if nothing had happened, as if nothing could happen. The burden did not weigh on them. Again, he's blaming them for the difficulties of his life, right? You say they do not express it, but they feel it. I do not believe it. I've thought so myself, but it is all wrong. One acts as one feels. Our acts, our ready compliance or our hesitation, they are what people may know us by, not by what we say with our lips, kindly or unkindly. So I think part of what is particularly hard for him to swallow is that he would imagine or see his father being this upstanding guy, behind the pulpit, talking about kindness, talking about love for one another, talking about turn the other cheek, talking about the Good Samaritan, whereas he feels, well, I'm your son and I'm having such a hard time. Of can't you apply some of that sort of good neighborliness to your own child, right? What I think and I think that's true, but what I think is missing is he's not exactly the perfect son. You know, he's been quite self-indulgent. He's been quite difficult. He's been, you could also argue, quite selfish. He seems to want his cake and eat it, right? I can kind of understand what he's saying is that behind the pulpit, his father says good things and nice things, and it's all about love and love one another, you know, as well. Jesus said, "Love one another as I have loved you." But I'm just saying this whole thing about love, and then when he's back home with his parents, like, this doesn't really feel like love. It sort of feels quite prickly, right? Again, if you look at this couple, do you think it's a warm and fuzzy, loving situation that's going on, right? I think that sort of says it all. You don't really need to say anything to describe it. That's telling you everything. So he says, "You may think of me what you will, Theo, but I will tell you that it is not my imagination. I tell you, Father will not cooperate. I see now what I saw then. I flatly contradicted Father then. I shall now speak out in any case, whatever might happen, against Father once more, because he does not want it. He makes it impossible." So here he's kind of making a pledge. He's kind of saying, you know what? From now on, I'm going to tell Dad exactly what I think. And again, you've got to say, Jeepers, this letter doesn't fill me with much confidence that Van Gogh is going to live happily ever after, or that Van Gogh's going to succeed as an artist, or that Van Gogh's phase in Nuenen is going to go anywhere. And that is what's quite incredible, is that it does. What's quite incredible is that when he arrives home, he's so negative, he's so full of blame, he's so bristling with resentment, he's so angry and upset, and he's in such a bad place. And yet he comes out of it in such a good place, in a way, right? I don't want to make it seem like it's oversimplified, that it just is this wonderful pleasure cruise when he's at home. It's not. I'm just trying to say that it starts off with him being really negative and very upset at being at home. And certainly looking at this letter, you think, Jeepers, what are the chances that this is going to work out well? And the answer is, just in a broad general sense, when he emerges out of this period, he's a better artist. His craft has definitely improved, right? Meep says, I wonder if they judged him by his art. Okay, so he goes on to say, it is damned awful, brother. So I think that is just a good summary of this entire letter. It's basically, I'm home and it's damn awful. He says the Rappards acted intelligently, but here, and he's got like 5 exclamation marks. He says, and everything one has done and is doing about it, it is rendered 3/4 useless because of them. It's tiresome, brother. With a handshake, yours, Vincent. Then written in the margin, they think they do no harm at this time. This is too bad. So I think a big part of why he's so upset is this thing of, one night they say, okay, we've decided you're going to be staying here. And then the next morning they say, we still need to think about it a little bit. That's what's really upsetting him. And I think on the one hand, you can say it is rational and normal to be upset about that, but the fact is they do allow him to stay there for, I think it's for about 2 years. So his concern is to some extent unfounded. You can kind of understand that it's like, well, my own parents are trying to decide whether to be nice to me or not. How fair is that? But you can also imagine he's getting kind of overly emotional late at night kind of thing, and the next morning things are sort of resolved, right? Paddy says, tell us how you really feel, Vincent. Well said. Yeah, Terry says, I'm not mad at you, I'm just disappointed. Stephanie says he found peace after time and space away from his parents, even having spent time away in an asylum. So he did have if you think about it, he did have a pretty hard life for the 2 years that he was away. Now he's going to have a lot taken care of, right? He's going to have meals cooked for him, meals provided for him, a bed made. He's going to have a lot of that stuff taken care of. And I can tell you as an artist that if you have that in your life, you have the domestic situation sorted out, that is a very big plus, so that that's the beginning of having a room of your own, and you can start concentrating on your work. Put in another way, if you don't have the basics sorted out, first of all, knowing that you can stay somewhere for length of time, getting into some sort of routine where you get your food and your rent and all that, all of that plays havoc with your ability to concentrate on other things, right? Not there yet, says I have to catch up on my reading. Meep says, were his parents well-to-do for that era? They looked tight with money. The answer is they were middle class. You might even say slightly above middle class. They were basically given the, what's the word? Like I think that in England you have a rectorage. I'm not sure if, or is that parsonage? It's basically if you are a minister, then you get to enjoy certain benefits of your position. It's almost like if you're a mayor of a town and they give you a house to live in and so on. Well, in that time, if you were a pastor, then you got a house, and they got quite a nice house, and he got a salary, and it was a pretty good salary as well. But you could also argue, did he have his own house? Not really. And very much he was at the mercy of his congregation. If his congregation decided you're a morally vacuous hypocrite, well then he wouldn't have a job. So Vincent was in a way a direct threat to that. But in another way, looking from the outside, what's quite interesting is it humanizes these people. The fact that their son is this incredibly troublesome personality in a sense. And on the other hand, and I don't mean this in a nasty way, but it's quite funny that you have Vincent being not just a little bit of a stick in the mud, but incredibly an incredible problem for these very uptight people. And so, he's going to, despite what's going to end up being quite a good arrangement for him, he's going to make or give them a lot more gray hairs than they already have. He's going to, for example, fall in love with a neighbor and start harassing his models. And the congregation are going to say, please, your son must stop painting the girls in the neighborhood, kind of thing, right? So, that's quite important. So I'm going to come back to this video. I first want to get to the point where this letter deals with it. So let's go on to the next letter. So this is written about a day later from Vincent to Theo, 7 to 8 December 1883. And he says, Dear Theo, it is still early. So you can see that he's struggling to sleep at night. He's got a lot of worrying going on. What is going to happen to me? He says, I want to add a few words to yesterday's letter in order to try and make some things clearer to you. But I beg you to consider what I say in this letter something I should be silent about if I did not think I can always count on your discretion and intelligence. So before we get to that, I want to play this is from another documentary, and the documentary is called The Power of Art, and it is narrated by Simon Sharma. Also beautifully done. The music is incredible. Andy Serkis acts the role of Van Gogh. I don't think his face and so on really captures it. I mean, I don't think he's a ginger fellow, but he captures the essence quite well. I don't think he captures the look very well, but he certainly captures the essence quite well. Simon Sharma, excellent narration. Also, just a fantastic documentary. Let me just repeat it. It is The Power of Art. I think it's the second in the series. So I hope the sound's going to be okay. Let's bring it up.
So when he lopes back to his parents' house, he's not exactly the apple of their eye.
I sense what father and mother think of me instinctively. I do not say intelligently. They shrink from taking me into the house as they might shrink from taking in a large shaggy dog with wet paws.
So I'm not sure if you caught that, and it doesn't really matter if you didn't hear it absolutely clearly, but you basically see this person who is obviously a grown man and he's sitting on his bed and he's complaining. That is exactly where we are in our story. And you saw an image of the side of a building or a church. That institution is really what is in a way calling the shots here, right? So anyway, let's continue here. He says, I've not said a single word to father and mother about the real difficulty of 2 years ago. However, I did mention a matter of secondary importance. On their part, father and mother do not even mention her, all right? Then they need not speak to me about it, neither need I to them. So I don't know whether that's a reference to scene, but you can see that Vincent is coming home with quite a lot of baggage. He's got a lot of unresolved issues with his parents and also feels like his love life, right? He wants to talk about her. And do they want to talk about her? Well, do you think they want to talk about her? Do you think they would prefer not to talk about her? What do you guys think? Then he says, they need not speak to me about it, neither need I to them. Indirectly, however, I touched upon the matter. I told father and mother that, in my opinion, it was seriously wrong that at a certain moment 2 years ago, I was forced to leave the house. I said that for me, this not only brought about considerable financial trouble, but also that it drove me to extremes and that I was forced into a much more stubborn attitude than I should have adopted of my own free will. So if you think about that, he's kind of saying to Theo that, and I think you've got to humor Van Gogh here a little bit and kind of say that you might say, you know what, he's making excuses. You might also say, why is he complaining about being kicked out when at this point he's being welcomed back, even though he's what's the word? He's the Afrikaans is uitdroogemaak, which means he dried up. It's another way of saying he messed up, right? So the fact is they welcoming him back. So why all of this kind of nonsense, right? I do think it's worth looking at what he's saying, where he's saying, this is why I am the way I am. And you might say he's blaming his parents, but I think there's another way you can look at that and say, it does actually make sense that he felt, I'm not ready to leave. And so because you forced me out, my choices were limited, etc., etc., etc. And although I think that's quite a good story and quite a good argument. The fact of the matter is, he also forced himself on them, in the sense that he was in love with Kivos, his cousin. Kivos didn't accept his advances, and that made everyone uncomfortable, and he wouldn't budge on that. And he doesn't quite seem to see his responsibility in that, right? He doesn't seem to recognize and remember the dynamic where he was forcing his sort of inappropriate conduct onto them, and they didn't have to accept it, and they didn't accept it, right? Anyway, he goes on to say, by way of example, I pointed out the contrast between the behavior of the Van Rappard family and that of the Van Gogh family. Again, you can see it's not looking very good. You can almost imagine that within a day or two, he's going to pack his bags and go somewhere else, right? He's not very happy with his family. And then he says, I pointed out that at times Van Rappard also has a difference of opinion with his father about this or that, but they always avoid extremes, not only for the world's benefit, but also for their own sakes. And that Rappard, though he does not earn a cent from his work, which for all that is very sound and even very beautiful, can always face the world in a dignified manner, also as regards his outfit and studio and such things. Now, again, what's a little bit unfair here is, although it's true that Van Rappard perhaps doesn't sell his art, and that's similar to Van Gogh, who doesn't sell his art, I don't think Van Rappard is trying to marry pregnant prostitutes or his cousin. That's kind of the main difference. I don't think Van Rappard is dressed like a carpenter or a blue collar person or whatever. That's kind of the difference here. He goes on to say, and that the family always sees to it that there's no money owing to the color dealers and so on. I told father how noble, how manly, just how I considered it of you, Theo, always to have come to my aid to the utmost of your powers. I pointed out that if father had been less iron-like and obstinate at the time, in short, less unintelligent, your help would have been efficacious, whereas now your help is not efficacious, and we have only half succeeded. So I don't know whether this is a good example, but I remember once, efficacious is a really big word for effective. I don't know if this is a good example, but I remember I was in Australia, and I won't go through the details, but bottom line was I phoned home. I phoned my father and I asked him for a loan. I didn't ask him like just send me money. I was like, anyway, let's just keep it short and simple. And he basically just kind of said no. So I needed some financial aid, not a lot, and he sort of either dodged it, but he anyway ultimately didn't help me. And I made no bones about it. It was like, this is quite urgent. And in the end, I lent money from my brother, my sister, and I think another person. And I just remember thinking, that's so weird. Like, so I got the help that I needed, but why didn't I get it from the most obvious person? Like, why can't a son ask his father for help? It wasn't a huge sum of money. And it was also not like, can you give me the money and I'll keep it forever? It was just like, I'm in a bit of a difficult position, right? And as I say, in the end, he didn't help me. And so I ended up getting help from my brother, sister, and another person. And it's like, these people have a lot less money than he does. So why do I have to get money from them and not from you, kind of thing? And I don't know if that's maybe just normal, where parents say, that's it. You're on your own, and that's the lesson you're supposed to learn. But I kind of get the sense that Vincent feels the same thing. It's like, why am I asking you, Theo, for money when Dad is capable of helping me as well? Why doesn't he help me? right? That's the kind of sense that I get. Stephanie says he's feeling quite bitter. Then he says, to this extent, I certainly did touch upon the past. At the same time, I pointed out that at present it is again difficult for me to avoid extremes, as the terms I feel I am on with the family are so bad that it becomes clear to me that the tie between you and me cannot last if matters are forever being left as they are. So again, there he is quite realistic. He says that the terms I feel I am on with the family are so bad. That's a very accurate statement. That's a very accurate statement. He also says in a way that, you know what, I am touching on the past a lot, almost as if to say maybe I shouldn't be stuck on the past, right? Karina, thanks a lot. Karina says, thanks for all your hard work and brilliant analysis. Hugs to all chat. We are an awesome bunch. I so value all opinions. I hope you're going to stay with us and you're not going to bed, Karina. It's still quite early, I think. Okay, so then he goes on to say that on thinking it over, whether I do right or wrong in accepting money from you, I must take how it looks into consideration. So again, there is Vincent being rational. He's saying, whether I'm doing the right or the wrong thing, taking money from you, Theo. And he's saying this to Theo. He says, I've got to acknowledge, how does that actually look? What do other people think about it? Does how something look matter? And I think a lot of young people go from the one extreme to the other, where they say how things look is all important. And then they'll go to another point where they'll say, I don't care what anybody thinks. And then they realize how things look, how something looks is important, and what people think is important. And then the third dimension is what I think is also important, and then finding some kind of balance between the two, right? Karina says, I'm staying. Good to hear that. Okay, so then he says, I tell you frankly that more and more I think the spirit prevailing in our family, especially in father, and for instance in CM, is wrong. With regard to you, my position is like this. So this is quite, this has been quite forthright. Now, bear in mind, in this letter, he's not saying anything about, wow, I saw a lark fly across the sky and I really liked the sort of light blue and it reminded me of this, and I saw the sunshine after the rain and the pond was sparkling. There's none of that. You can see that he's not painting really at all at this point while he's writing these letters. He's sort of caught up in the emotional drama of moving back home and the whole status quo that's sort of going on. And at the same time, he's now defining his position to his brother in a letter. And so this gives us a sense of, okay, this is Van Gogh's own words for how he sees his relationship with his brother. So he says, with regard to you, my position is like this. On the one hand, I believe there's yet a possibility of your character, like mine, repudiating many things we have been taught. I say it is possible that a revulsion of feeling will come about in your mind, either gradually or suddenly, and that this will force you to adopt a new conception of life, which perhaps will finally result in your becoming a painter. So he's kind of saying to his brother, I think you are a lot like me, and you might become like me. And there's a little bit of truth in it, I think. Then he says, on the other hand, in sharp contrast to this, there is, for instance, you're saying last summer, I'm getting more and more like father. So he's now making a bit of he's pointing his finger a little bit at his brother, remembering that his brother said, you're getting a lot like dad. I don't like it. Then he says, if this were true, that is to say, if you were to become more and more a Van Gogh, a character like father or Mo, and if by always being in business you should acquire a conception of life entirely different from mine, namely a commercial spirit, more or less a political personality, well, putting it bluntly, In this case, I should prefer to have no intimate relations with you. Then, instead of strengthening the ties between us, I would rather part company, both understanding that we are not well matched. So this is quite a unusually, I won't say nasty. I don't think he's really being nasty here, but it's certainly not a terribly nice thing he's saying to his brother. But this is actually touching on exactly what I want to sort of get at. I'm going to deal with it in the next letter. But again, what is this thing that is eating at Van Gogh and also going to be eating at these people? What is the thing that is eating at them? What is the thing that's eating at him? So he says, at the moment, I am right under Father's nose. I see, I hear, I feel what Father is, and I do not approve of it. It's kind of quite ironic. This son who's treating his father almost like a father, a disapproving father treats his son. There's kind of this mutual, what is the word, abrogation? Let me just have a look. Yeah, it's just, there's this mutual contempt in a way for one another. Then he goes back. He says, now to revert to the fact that I told Father it was wrong that 2 years ago we quarreled so violently that I was locked out of the house afterward. It does not matter so much whose fault it was. It would have been according to Father's own principles. If he had been consistent to avoid this quarrel at all costs. And what does Father say to this? Yes, but I cannot take back anything of what I did then. What I have done, I've always done for your own good, and I've always followed my sincere conviction. To this I reply that it may happen that a person's conviction is completely at variance with conscience. I mean, what one thinks one should do may be diametrically opposed to what one ought to do. I told Father that in the Bible itself, maxims can be found by which we may test our convictions to see whether they are reasonable and just, and that Father was too much in the habit of omitting to do so and of flying into a violent passion, in my opinion, very unjustly and very arbitrarily, very reprehensibly, not as regards his conviction, but as regards his conscience. Enough. So I was standing before a barrier of implacability indeed, although Father tried to divert my reasoning and to confuse the issue and to prevent my pursuing the subject. But I did not allow myself to be diverted, and I said, Pa, here I am faced by your self-righteousness, which was and is fatal for you as well as for me. Then Father said, do you expect me to kneel before you? And I think that is a fantastic response from his father. Like, what do you expect? What do you expect? And you've got to kind of ask, what is his father supposed to do in the situation? But what is the response that Vincent wants? What's he supposed to do? You know, like, Vincent, can you write me a script for exactly what I must do that's going to be acceptable? Then he says, and then I said that I took this very ill of Father and that I thought it coarse of Father only to look at it that way, and that I should not waste my breath on the subject any longer. So his father says that, and Vincent then sort of just seems to walk away. But I think he needs to think about what does he expect from his father? There's no need for Father to say that he committed any error in my case, but Father should have learned what I learned in these 2 years, that it was an error in itself, and that it should be rectified immediately, without raising the question of whose fault it was. Now, if you think about what's going on here, Vincent has an argument with his father, then he writes to his brother and writes in quite a lot of detail explaining the merits of everything. And you kind of think, Vincent, shouldn't you be dealing with this directly with your dad, right? Then he says, look, brother, in my opinion, Father is forever lapsing into narrow-mindedness instead of being bigger, more liberal, broader, and more humane. It was a clergyman's vanity that carried things to extremes at the time, and it is still that same clergyman's vanity that will cause more disasters now and in the future. I do not beg for your mediation. I do not beg for anything personal on your part, but I ask you point blank how we stand. Are you a Van Gogh too? I've always looked upon you as Theo. By the way, I just want to talk a little bit about the pronunciation. So I would say the way I pronounce Van Gogh is also the way Simon Sharma does. But in the Netherlands, in other words, in Van Gogh's home, the van or the fun would be even more pronounced. So you'd say Van Gogh, and the G would be a little bit more inflection on it. So even though I say Ga, in the Netherlands, you'd probably say Go, right? So it would be Van Gogh, right? Or actually even Van Gogh, like that, right? In America, no, it's Van Gogh. That's not how I think Van Gogh said his own name. Interestingly, in France, it's pronounced Van Gogh, right? Like that, Van Gogh. So it's quite interesting just how many different pronunciations there are. Then he goes on to say, in character, I'm rather different from the various members of the family, and essentially, I am not a Van Gogh. I think that's quite an ironic thing to say for someone who would become the world's most beloved artist. And, you know, everything is about, is this a Van Gogh or not, right? It's quite a thing. Bridget Bowman in Australia says, hi, just waking up. They're both intelligent and opinionated. Vincent and father, I mean, more like each other than either would ever admit. Okay. Then he says, if you become a personality, if you were going to play a part in the world, like Father or CM, or even, I'm not sure who that is V Kivos, I don't know. All right, I should not try to interfere. I should take you at your own valuation. I should be silent about it. But our ways would diverge so much that I should not think it advisable to continue our financial relations. I hope you'll understand what I want to express. If not, you'll have to give it time. So there's a little bit of barbs in this letter for poor Theo, right? Then he says, who knows whether in the course of the next 3 years you will not come to look upon certain questions the way I do. Why? Because you will be influenced by art and intercourse with artists, and in short, in consequence, you will get to be bigger and broader instead of smaller and narrower. I think this is a very true statement. And I think it's true in this letter at this time. And I think it does end up becoming true, is that Theo in Paris does move beyond his upbringing. He does sort of take quite a bohemian path in terms of his life. He is influenced by art. He is influenced by artistic mindsets, and he does broaden his mind in some ways that are useful, and others that not so much. Then he says, well, old fellow, try to help me get away from here if you can. So that's quite a statement as well. He's kind of saying, Theo, can I maybe come stay with you? I'm not happy here. Can you maybe save me, kind of thing? Kind regards, and believe me, yours sincerely, Vincent. Now, this is the letter I really want to get to. So it's quite a jump from the 8th of December. We go to the 17th, like more than a week later, right? And so now the question is, what happened in this week that went by? So Vincent was obviously very upset, and there was a lot of drama going on. What has happened in the week? Have things settled down? Has there been any progress? Have there been any setbacks? Have there been any arguments? Have there been any sort of agreements from both sides, right? Stephanie says that was an incredible letter. So he starts with saying, "Dear brother, I sense what father and mother instinctively, I do not say intelligently, think about me." And this is where I'm going to address and answer the question. The question is, why is there such discord between Vincent and his parents? Where is that coming from, right? This is where we're going to deal with that, right? So I'm going to play you two clips from these two documentaries dealing with this part of the letter, right? And this is the letter from 17 December. So the first clip is this one.
Stay with us for the time being to make. Despite the difficulties at home, it was around this time that Vincent came into his own as an artist, starting with the drawings of local weavers.
So that is why I find this documentary, for example, so fantastic. Is obviously a lot of time and effort has gone into scripting this in a good way, but there you have it done in such a clear and concise way. Is what is the ultimate result of Vincent moving home? Well, the result is that his parents disapprove of him and he disapproves of them. The result is that he feels like a shaggy dog that's not really wanted at home. He feels like um, a kind of a burden and a nuisance, and someone who's sort of creating problems, right? And yet, despite these inconveniences on both sides, a substrate is nevertheless laid down where Vincent is able to eat his meals, sleep in his bed, and then get up in the morning and start to take stock of what is around him. And one of the things that's around him are these weavers, and he starts paying attention to them. And that is something I've been wanting to get to really, really badly, because to me, this particular moment in his life, in his evolution as an artist, I think was a seminal moment, right? It, in a way, absolutely defines a key aspect of Van Gogh, right? We're not going to deal with it, I think, in this episode, probably episode 25, but it's an incredible moment that catches you completely unawares. You know, he is drawing these weavers, and then suddenly something happens that has an incredible impact on him. And the weirdest part of all is that the impact is sort of indirect. Something happens where he recognizes something, but it only manifests later on in his artistic career, which is pretty incredible. Stephanie says he doesn't belong. Terry says a very lonely feeling. Yeah, Karina says very concise. So that's one version. I want to play you another version from the Power of Art. This is from dealing with the same moment in the letter. So this is where Andy Serkis talks about it.
You're getting everyone's way. His bark is so loud and short. He is a filthy beast.
And then it happens. The Potato Eaters is his first knockout masterpiece.
So I don't know if you caught that, but basically you have this juxtaposition in The Power of Art from Simon Schama, where he juxtaposes Vincent lying on his bed, griping, complaining, moaning, not happy. And then out of that turmoil, out of that dissatisfaction, emerges his first masterpiece. And that's why I say, whatever you think about all of this complaining, all of this sort of gnashing of teeth, in this environment, Vincent actually gets his start as a proper artist. prior to this, he doesn't really produce anything of terribly important significance. So sorrow is to some extent on the way to something that's worth noticing. But the Potato Eaters is something, is a real achievement, and he achieves this while he's at home, right? Do you follow what I'm getting at? Is that in the midst of this adversity and moaning, the stage is set for the beginning of this great arc to greatness, right? In other words, it was important that he did come home and that he struggled through his struggles, that he continued to fight for his art and to be an artist. And it also shows that he'd found himself. Does that make sense? It also shows that he didn't go home and his father said to him, I want you to become a bricklayer, and I want you to take out the garbage. And Vincent turned on his back and did exactly as he was told. You can tell that he's become who he is. Vincent has found himself, even though it feels like he's gotten lost all over again, right? And often that feeling of being lost is a very useful and powerful feeling, because a lot of the time we are lost, but we don't know it. So when you have that feeling that I am lost, it's actually a sense of being found, right? If you have that feeling of being disturbed, that feeling that of being disoriented and that I don't know where I am and I don't know where things are going, that is actually a sign that you do know, that you recognize that things aren't going where they should be, possibly in relation to yourself, that you know who you are and where you are in terms of your environment's not swimming along with you, right? Does that make sense? In other words, Vincent has achieved a sense of self in that time that he was away, and that is worth a lot. That is definitely worth a lot. Who has that painting? I don't know. I would imagine the Van Gogh gallery. Let me search for it quickly. I think it's in the Van Gogh Museum. Yeah, it's in the Van Gogh Museum. So if you want to read a bit more about the Potato Eaters, you can check out this link. Meep says it's beautiful. I've got to say I don't particularly like it. I think it's a powerful picture in a way. It's got what's the word? It's got a strong sense of theme, but I don't know if I particularly like it. To me, it's the antithesis of Van Gogh. It's dark, it's morbid, it's all of that kind of thing. Go Batman, thanks a lot for that. Good to see you here. Stephanie says he's becoming more certain of who he is and what he'd like to be and be like. That's well said. Yeah, it is quite a depressing artwork, but we'll deal with that in a moment. So now we go back to the letter, and this is where he says, they shrink from me, that they shrink from taking me into the house as they might from taking a big shaggy dog who is sure to come into the room with wet paws and is so very shaggy. He will get in everyone's way, and his bark is so loud. In short, he is a filthy beast, right? And remember he said earlier that he was like a pig and crude and so on, right? Now he describes himself as a filthy beast. Then he goes on to say, very well, but the beast has a human history. And although he is a dog, he has a human soul. and what is more, one so sensitive that he can feel what people think about him, which an ordinary dog cannot do. So it's kind of saying, and I mean, this is a very good description of Van Gogh, is Van Gogh looks like a dog. He looks ordinary. He looks decrepit. He looks poor, right? But he, let's just bring this letter up a bit. But he isn't a dog. He's a very cultured, well-educated, articulate fellow, right? And as he says, that he is so sensitive that he can feel what people think about him, right? And then he says, and this is so, again, if you say Van Gogh is a madman or Van Gogh is cuckoo or he's emotional or he's intense or whatever, here he says, and I, admitting that I'm a sort of dog, accept them for what they are, right? So that is an extraordinary statement. He's saying this thing that is actually kind of insulting, I kind of accept it. I am actually, yes, it's true, I am a bit of a dog. I am a bit disgusting. I get that. But I accept you for who you are. Why can't you accept me for who I am, right? So can you see that in that is a kind of a brilliance, in that he is not completely ignorant of his shortcomings, to put it mildly, right? And there's something of a sense of humor in the way that he conveys this as well. Although it's pathetic, although it's unsettling to him, he does it in a way that is to some extent amusing, right? And your heart definitely goes out to him. You sort of feel, wow, the fact that you are in the situation, that you can see yourself in the situation, that you're persisting in this, you do sort of feel for him. Also, given the fact that he becomes who he ultimately becomes, right? So now I want to address the question. The question was, why is Vincent going to be rubbing his parents the wrong way and vice versa? This is where he touches on it very, very well, very articulately. A lot of you guys have referred to it in a fairly good way here and there. But this is, I think, a very effective way of thinking about it. Vincent's parents belong to a certain class, and Vincent doesn't belong to that class. You don't need to think about it in terms of his beliefs or their beliefs. You don't have to think about it in terms of their familial relationships. You don't have to think that it's a parent and son scenario. The best way to think about it is when he left them, they both came from the same class. When he returned to them, he returned as someone from a different class. And he will continue to belong to that class for the rest of his life, right? And they will continue to belong to their class for the rest of their lives. And Theo is a kind of an intermediary. Theo, I don't think, I suppose you could say technically belongs to the same class as his parents, but Theo's also to some extent sympathetic to Vincent's journey, although he doesn't take it that far. Theo is an employed guy, but he's also not so caught up in money that he won't give his brother money. And it costs him, the fact is he's giving his brother money, which in a way brings him down in a way. Like he could have been a lot wealthier if he didn't do that. But I think the easiest way to imagine this is it's literally someone from a particular, whether you want to call it economic class or social class or whatever, but a certain class structure. You could even just simply call it the middle class. It's a middle class person living with someone from a lower class. And Vincent wants to belong to the lower class. He feels comfortable with that. He feels like he doesn't belong to the middle class or whatever it is, and he doesn't want to belong. He doesn't belong and he doesn't want to belong. And you can imagine that a pastor absolutely wants to be middle class and to represent the middle class and to belong to the middle class and to preach to the middle class and have the middle class sort of appreciate and resonate. Does that make sense? A preacher wants to be a product of a certain society, and he wants to make products of society. He wants to make models of a society. And what Vincent is doing is the antithesis of that. And if you think about it, who in their right minds sort of literally chooses and wants to go to a lower class? You can imagine someone wanting to go to a higher class, but not to a lower class, right? And if you think about it like that, if you think about it not as Vincent is the son of Theodorus, if you just think of it as a class struggle, you can see how it is in a way irreconcilable, right? And you can also see through that that is what makes Van Gogh quite a difficult dude in a way to understand and in another way to live with, because you'd constantly be reminded that you a snob, or that you full of airs and graces, or that you spoiled, or that, or this or that, or the next thing, right? Stephanie says Vincent is thinking for himself. So does that make sense what I'm saying to you guys? Do you guys see that in that simple sense? And then does that make sense to you? Bridget says, what caused him to have to go home? Illness, money. Yeah, basically his brother no longer paying for what was going on with him and Scene. So, without that, he didn't really have a choice, right? Yvonne says, in past letters, Vincent said being like the lower classes helped him relate to his art subjects. Good point, Yvonne. Meep says, what did Theo do for a living? Theo was an art dealer. Vincent started as an art dealer. Theo followed in his footsteps. And so, to some extent, Vincent was a mentor for Theo, except that Theo got one job and continued his job as an art dealer until his death. So, yeah. Meep, the other thing with his brother being an art dealer was it sort of made sense that Vincent would paint, give his pictures to Theo, and Theo would sell them. It was like a marriage made in heaven. It was sort of like the perfect deal. The only problem was that Theo just couldn't sell his brother's art. Okay, let's continue. So it says, this house is also too good for me. So after everything we've just said, does that make sense? And he says, and father and mother and the family are so exceedingly refined, though not sensitive underneath, and they are clergymen, lots of clergymen. The dog, that's a reference to himself, appreciates that if they do keep him, they're only putting up with him, only just tolerating his presence in this house. So he will try to track down a kennel elsewhere. So he kind of gets the sense that he is this this embarrassment, he's this tedious issue, and is a temporary setback, and it's just a matter of time, and he will eventually find his way and be out of their hair, kind of thing. He goes on with that analogy. He says, in fact, this dog used to be father's son once upon a time. And it was father who left him out in the streets a little too long. So he was bound to become rougher. But seeing that father forgot this many years ago, and he has never thought deeply about what the bond between father and son means, we had best say nothing about it. Again, you get that sense of bitterness, but you also get a sense that, oh, wow, I actually see what he's getting at. Yeah. So you can see that Vincent's not entirely superficial, although some of his choices do seem a little bit shallow. He is quite on point on this particular point. And then he says, and then the dog could easily bite. He could easily become rabid. and the village policeman would have to come around and shoot him. Oh yes, all that is perfectly true, no doubt about it. On the other hand, dogs can also be guard dogs, but there's no need for that. They say it's peaceful here. There's no question of any danger, so I shall say no more about it. The only thing that the dog regrets is that he came back, because it wasn't as lonely on the heath as it is in the house, despite all that kindness. So although they sort of doing the right thing and they're taking him in, he nevertheless feels like an outcast. He feels judged. He feels this sort of a cold kindness, right? Then he says, the poor beast's visit was a weakness, which I hope will be forgotten, and which he will avoid repeating in the future. Because I have had no expenses since I've been here, and because I have twice received money from you, I paid for the journey myself, and also for the clothes father bought me because mine weren't good enough. I think that really, reinforces what I've been saying in a big way, is that the moment he arrives home, his father looks at him and is like, wow, we've got to change this. You can't be coming home or leaving home or walking around town as my son looking that way. We're going to have to get you completely new clothes, right? Remember, that is these people.
His tail between his...
So if you think about it, both of them, Vincent and his parents, have got quite a challenge on their hands. Their parents, being Christians and good people, have got to somehow make this delicate, difficult situation work. And Vincent as well has got to, because he doesn't have money and he doesn't really have a choice, he's got to make this delicate situation work. And I think to some extent the humor of I'm a dog and that's fine and it's true is the first step in the right direction to saying, well, that is the reality here and that's okay, kind of thing. So then he says, I've repaid Rappard the 25 guilders. I'm sure you'll be pleased about this. Everything was such a mess. Dear Theo, enclosed is the letter I was writing when I received yours, which I shall now answer, having carefully read what you say. So this is quite interesting. This is Theo's response to a lot of Vincent's griping and grumbling and certain things he's saying that are true. What do you think Theo thinks about this? Theo is also one of the sons of the Van Goghs. What does he think about it? So this is going to be quite interesting. Bridget says, I love dogs. I shall start by saying, I think it noble of you that, believing that I'm making things difficult for father, you take his part and give me a brisk dressing down. So that is really Theo's response. And I can't help thinking that Theo acted, I think, in the right way there, to basically say, listen, Vincent, you're going to need to play ball. If you're going to stay with Pa, you need to sort of live by their rules, kind of thing. You know, they have at least taken you in. Forget about what happened in the past. Make the most of now, kind of thing. This is another chance. Then he says, I value this in you, although you are taking up arms against one who is neither father's enemy nor yours, but who would nevertheless like to present a few serious questions for father's consideration and yours, who tells you what I'm telling you because that is the way I feel, and who asks, why is this so? In any event, so we know that Theo, in Vincent's words, gave Vincent a brisk dressing down. In other words, he said, Vincent, stop your BS. You know, what they're doing, they don't have to do. You're 30 years old. Be grateful, kind of thing. Then he says, in many respects, your answers to various passages in my letter bring out certain aspects of the matter with which I'm not unfamiliar myself. Your objections are partly my own objections, but they are not sufficient. So once again, I appreciate your goodwill and likewise your desire for reconciliation and peace, which indeed I've never doubted. So there you have it. His brother basically says, you know what? I would like to see you guys get along. You might not agree, but can't you just put your differences aside? Can't you just somehow make this work? And so, in a really wonderful way, Theo ends up being, even though he's the younger brother, Theo ends up being a kind of a broker for peace, for family harmony, even though there clearly is discord and bad feelings, right? Um, Then he goes on to say, even so, brother, I could easily raise a great many objections to your suggestions. I think part of what Vincent was doing by sending this letter was sort of saying to Theo, can you save me? Can you invite me to Paris? Can I come and stay with you? He doesn't say it in those many words, but I think that was what he ideally wanted. And the answer was, and ultimately as it turned out, was that Vincent wasn't really ready. And when Vincent did eventually go to Paris, he kind of made a mess. He got on his brother's nerves. But it was important for him to learn how to get along with people who weren't a lot like him, starting with his own family, right? Stephanie says, may we all be blessed to find a Theo. Yeah. Then he says, well, it is my belief that I am the stumbling block, and so it is up to me to find a way of not find a way of not to making things difficult for you or for Father any longer. So that's quite a big statement where he basically says, okay, I realize I'm the problem here, and I'm the one making things difficult. And he says, I'm now prepared to make things as easy as possible and as peaceful as possible for both of you. So, as much as Vincent can be stubborn and a beast and dogmatic, excuse the pun, he can also take accountability. Yeah, he is actually taking accountability. He's saying, I see what you're saying. You've made me realize certain things, although I had thought about them. I am the stumbling block here. I am making things difficult. I am going to try and make things easier and better, right? And so isn't that such a good situation after just about a week? Vincent, in a way, I won't say does a U-turn, but he certainly softens his very hard position considerably. Do you agree with that? Yeah, be reasonable. Yvonne says that's a big concession on Vincent's part. Vincent can be a very intractable, stubborn guy who just sticks, and he can stick to his guns for weeks and months and even years. So the fact that he takes this position is really quite special. And it's kind of a relief, because if he'd sort of folded his arms and said, you know what, you change, right? Dad, you at fault here. I don't know how the story would have ended. I can't think that it would have gone very well. Ricardo Ortiz, thanks very much for that. Okay, so he goes on to say, so you are also of the opinion that I'm the one who's making things difficult for Father and that I am a coward. So I don't know whether he would have used that word, but anyway, there it is. Then he says, well, I shall do my best in future to keep everything from you and from Father. I shan't visit Father again, and if you approve, shall stick to my proposal that for the sake of our mutual freedom of thought and for the sake of not making things difficult for you as well, a view I fear you are inadvertently beginning to take, we put an end to our financial arrangement by March. So what seemed like quite a nice gesture from Vincent looks like it's got a bit of a hard edge to it. He's kind of saying, you know what, 3 months from now, you can actually stop giving me money. I've had enough, which is in a way quite odd if you think about it. It's like the older brother is laying down the law to his younger brother who's giving him money, and he's saying, you can actually stop giving me money 3 months from now because I don't really like where this is going, right? Then he says, I ask for a little grace for the sake of order and to allow myself time to take a few steps, which, though they have very little chance of success, my conscience does not allow me to put off in the circumstances. You must take this calmly and in good heart, brother. It is not an ultimatum to you. But if our feelings differ too greatly, well then, we must not rush to sweep everything under the carpet. Isn't that more or less your opinion as well? So there's a little bit of a pendulum swing, sort of in the sense that he doesn't speak too kindly to Theo, and then in the next vein is fairly conciliatory, right? Then he says, you do realize, don't you, that I'm sure you have saved my life, and I shall never forget that. Even after we have put an end to relations, which I fear would place us into a false position, I shall still not only be your brother, your friend, but I shall also owe you an infinite debt of loyalty because you held out your hand to me and because you have gone on helping me. So this is a huge, huge statement from him, where he's just saying, Theo, you really mean a lot to me. You are more than a brother. You're more than a friend. I owe you an infinite debt of loyalty. I owe you so much because of the way you held out a hand when I was kind of this problem. I was this, everybody turned their back on me except you. Wanzi, thanks very much. Appreciate it. And then he makes another big statement. Again, it's almost Shakespearean in its profundity. He says, this isn't about money, it's about kindness. It's not just, Theo doesn't just send money to Vincent. He writes letters to him. He answers his letters. He reads his letters and he responds to them. He occasionally visits him. He offers to give him his clothing as he did during the Borinage period. He listens to Vincent talking about romantic relationships and seems to share some of his own as well. And besides all of that, he seems to act as a bridge where he's getting information from his own family, his own parents, and he's also getting information from Vincent, and he's deciding how much to let them know and how much to let him know, in terms of what he knows, they know, kind of thing. But at the end of all of this, Vincent is just overcome by, wow, you have been such a kind person to me compared to anybody else. And I think it's true. Theo was very, very kind. Theo was the first person to recognize something in his brother and look at where it got him. If you think about Theo, Stephanie was talking about, something that I said earlier, may you be blessed to find your Theo. A Theo is someone who just supports you in a way that gets you where you need to go. And that can be incredible, in the scheme of things. I know this is not necessarily a good example, but Lance Armstrong had a how can I put it? He was in a single mom scenario, but his mother believed in him so much that Lance went on to become Lance. Now, as I said, it's not necessarily the best example, but in that story, his mother was his Theo. It was someone who was the first person to believe in him and was someone who believed in him all along. And just that, somebody that believes in you throughout your whole life really does mean something. And that's why if you have young kids, like Stephanie does, one of the greatest gifts you can give a child and really one of the greatest gifts you can give anyone is to value someone, give them a sense of their own value, but also value them. And that is the great gift that Theo gave Vincent. To some extent, it is giving that gift without evidence, without him selling any paintings, but also not giving that gift like, wow, I'm going to be Mother Teresa. You also got to hold that person accountable. And Vincent has been held accountable by his brother. Despite this great friendship between them, his brother says, you must stop making things difficult. Despite this great relationship, his brother says, his brother gives him what he calls a brisk dressing down. His brother's able to say to him, "This, what you're doing is not right here." So it's not just unconditional love and support no matter what. It's knowing when you value someone, and it's knowing when you hold them accountable, and in a way that you don't turn them away. You can still love them and say, look, it's not right what you're doing. To criticize in love, and very few people have the art of doing that right. You know what I mean? Zenaida Rivera says, my Theo was my deceased husband. Good to see you here, Zenaida. So think about who your Theo is, and if you don't have a Theo, think about whether you are a Theo to somebody, or if you could be. So then he goes on to say, do you guys agree that these are really powerful letters? They're really from the heart. They really come from a really deep place. They're very, in a real sense, foundational. They're foundational to the person Vincent's going to be and sort of already is, right? They are really quite fundamental to the story, which is why this comment about being a shaggy dog, and he doesn't just mention it, he keeps coming back to that metaphor, why it makes it into two separate documentaries. Then he says, please send me the usual by return of mail if you can, then I shan't have to ask Father for anything when I leave, which I ought to do as soon as possible. So here is a bit of an ominous message where he's being told by his brother, you're making things worse. And then he is saying, I actually want to leave here. I'm planning on leaving. Then he says, I gave all the 23.80 guilders you sent on December 1 to Father for 14 guilders borrowed and 9 guilders for shoes and trousers. I gave all the 25 guilders you sent on December 10 to Rappard. I still have a quarter and a few cents in my pocket. So that is the financial position, which you will understand if you also take into account that I paid for the expenses in Drenthe over a long period out of the money from November 20th. So Drenthe is the place we lived in for about 3 months after The Hague and just before he moved in with his parents. Then he says, from here I shall go to Rappards, and from Rappards perhaps to Mauves. My intention is thus to try to do everything in a calm and orderly fashion. So he's expressing here the intention to not run away from home, but to leave home, right? So you kind of get the sense that things aren't resolved, and that although Theo admonished his brother and advised his brother is feeling like it's my way or the highway, basically, which he's not going to maintain. He's not going to maintain that, but that's certainly how I was expressing it here. Vincent was older than Theo, about 4 years older. Then he says, there is too much in my candidly expressed opinion of father, which I cannot take back in the circumstances. I appreciate your objections, but many of them do not convince me. Otherwise, I've already thought of myself, even though I write as I do. I put my feelings in strong terms, and they have naturally been modified by my appreciation that there's much good in father. That modification has been substantial, of course. Allow me to tell you that I never knew that someone of 30 was a boy, particularly when he has probably had more experience than most during those 30 years. I don't know whether I agree with that. I think he has had some experience. He went to London, he went to Ramsgate, he worked for a while in Paris. But certainly in terms of the opposite sex and to some extent work and friendships, I'm not sure if he's had a terrible amount of friendship experience. He goes on to say, but do think of my words as the words of a boy if you want. I'm not responsible for how you view what I say, am I? That is your business. Now, what you are seeing repeated here is Vincent referring to himself in a sort of self-limiting way, in a bit of a what's the word? He's sort of in a self-deprecating way, is referring to himself as a dog, as a boy, and that is obviously a kind of reality that he's in. Is that he wanted to be a man, he wanted to be whatever he wanted to be, and now that he arrives back home, he feels reduced. He feels the separation, and he doesn't like how that looks or it feels. It's just not a very pleasant experience for him. And when is it ever? When is that sort of thing ever a good experience? Meep says, do you think if it was the other way around that Vincent would have helped Theo like this? It's a good question. I think so. I think Theo and Vincent were very similar, and they had another brother, Cor, and they didn't have much of a relationship with him. So you kind of got the idea that Theo and Vincent were in a way two peas in a pod. They both were really crazy about art. So, and they had a very long friendship which went both ways. It goes on to say, as far as father is concerned, I shall take the liberty of putting what he thinks of me from my mind the moment we part. It may be, I'm not sure if that's polite or is it politic? It may be politic to keep what one feels to oneself, but it has always seemed to me that serenity is a duty, especially for a painter. Whether people understand what I say, whether they judge me rightly or wrongly, is neither here nor there as far as I'm concerned, as you once pointed out to me. So you almost get a sense from that Vincent's saying, I wear my heart on my sleeve. I express how I feel. And whether you judge me rightly or wrongly, that's what I'm going to do. And again, think about in July, why doesn't he wear his heart on his sleeve when he's done that his whole life, right? Then he says, well, brother, even if there's a separation in whatever way, you know that I'm your friend, perhaps much more than you realize or understand, and even father's friend. With a handshake, ever yours, Vincent. Postscript, in any event, I'm neither father's enemy nor yours, nor shall I ever be. So you can see what's going on here is, to some extent, a state of flux, right? Things are finding their way with a little bit of difficulty, but they are finding their way. And what is good is that there's quite a lot of communication taking place. So now we go from the 17th of December to the 18th of December. Now, think about the timing of all of this. Whatever is going to happen here, Christmas is on the way. So no matter how angry Vincent is, no matter how disappointed or whatever his father is, and maybe his mother as well, ultimately, because of the way that they are, because of the way the Van Gogh family are, they're going to have a Christmas. And you can kind of imagine, no matter how much arguing, no matter how much fighting has been taking place, by the time Christmas comes, it's kind of almost going to be too late. You're going to have a nice meal together. Everyone's going to be there, all the kids, and it's going to be quite pleasant. And then, do you want to argue after Christmas? And the answer is going to be not really. Let's just why don't we all just get along, right? So we not quite at Christmas. We're a week before Christmas. And so another letter from Vincent to Theo. Dear Theo, Merv once told me you will find yourself if you persist at your art, if you go more deeply into it than you have been doing up to now. He said that 2 years ago. Now, if you think about it, Vincent hasn't really been drawing or painting. You don't hear him describing any sketches. You don't hear anything like that because he's ensconced in these arguments and he isn't sure whether he's staying or going, right? So I think once he talks about art and produces something, it's going to be the end of this period of family discord and disagreement. Stephanie says Vincent is quite reflective. You can kind of understand that he is, because he's arrived home and he can't do anything except reflect on where he's come from, and that in a way it's 2 years of lost time. He sort of feels like, have I achieved anything? Have I achieved nothing? Have I achieved something? Am I an artist after all? Am I going to be allowed to be an artist? Who am I? Where do I go from here? Where am I going to be permitted to go? What power do I possibly have over my fate, right? Then he says, lately I've been thinking a lot about those words. Now, there's another reference to being a dog. So he's kind of absorbed, accepted, acknowledged this thing of, this is my status. What do I do with that? What do I do with my situation? What do I do with my circumstances? There's another reference, Shaggy Sheepdog. So it's not just a throwaway reference. He thought about it, and it's definitely true for him. It's something that's quite authentic for him. There's another reference to a dog. He talks about a degree of poverty versus position of affluence. Do you see what I mean by belonging to a certain class versus another one? There's another reference to dog. Another one, dog. And there is talking a little bit about art. And this seems to be like a really long letter. This seems to be a pretty long letter. It's because it's got a really, really, really long postscript. Yeah, I just want to see. So 18th of December, then 21st December, 22nd December, and then late December. And then I think that's another one in December, and another one in December. Wow. And then he gets to the Weavers. Yeah, quite a lot of letters to get through. I think I'm going to try and do maybe 2 more letters. Okay, so he says, lately I've been thinking a lot about those words of his. I find myself that I am that dog. The notion may be a bit overstated. Reality may have less pronounced, less starkly dramatic contrast, but I believe that fundamentally the rough character sketch applies. The shaggy sheepdog I tried to portray for you in yesterday's letter is my character, and the animal's life is my life, if, that is, one omits the details and merely states the essentials. That may seem exaggerated to you, but I do not take it back. So what he's trying to say is, this is not just me coming home. I don't really belong here. They know it and I know it. I'm a different person. I belong to a different class. I'm a different creature, and that's reality. He goes on to say, personalities aside, just as an impartial character study, as if I were talking about strangers and not about you and me and Father, for the sake of analysis, I draw your attention once more to last summer. I see two brothers walking in The Hague. Look upon them as strangers, as other people. Do not think of yourself or of me or Father. Now, do you remember I said to you earlier, don't think of the family dynamics here. Don't think of father and son. Just think of it in terms of class. That's how he's thinking about it as well. And he says, one of them says, I'm getting more and more like Father. I have to maintain a certain social position. Right? That's exactly what I was talking about. A certain affluence, very moderate, both in your case and in Father's. I must stay in business. I don't think I'm going to become a painter. The other says, I'm getting less and less like Father. I'm turning into a dog. I feel that the future will probably make me ugly and rougher still, and I foresee a degree of poverty as my lot. But man or dog, I shall be a painter. In short, a creature with feeling. That's quite a huge statement. Is saying, this is the path that lies before me, and I will walk that path. Although you may turn up your nose, although you may sniff at me, although you may judge me, I am that creature, but I'm actually a creature with feeling. I am a sensitive creature, and he is, and he was. He goes on to say, so as Karina says, Vincent's defending his identity here. Vincent's also asserting his identity. And I also want to take this opportunity to say that people who say Vincent killed himself because he was troubled, because he was struggling, because he was depressed, people who say that don't understand that many years earlier, he wanted a life to some extent of suffering. He wanted a life to some extent that would be difficult and troubled. He wanted this dog's life because he saw that as an edifying, holy life in a way, and he saw that as his fate, as his journey, right? And so to say, he killed himself because he didn't want the life that he did want. Well, he did. He did want that life. He got the life that he wanted. He got the struggle that he wanted, maybe, and then some, but he also got a lot of magic. He got, as much as you might say Vincent had a horrible life or a tragic life, he also got to do what he wanted to do, which is paint. And I don't know how many artists can say that. There are a lot of people who want to become artists and writers that aren't supported. They aren't supported by family, certainly not for weeks and weeks and months and years on end without showing anything for it. So in that sense, he was really privileged. I watched a movie yesterday, Elvis, and Elvis died at 42. But there's a little interview he gives where he says, I experienced a lot, and a lot of my dreams came true. And you know, it was kind of like saying, I'm happy with my life. I got far more than I bargained for, right? So I just want to again just reiterate this notion, this misconception that Vincent was this depressed, mad artist. His struggles went back years, and he also asked for this. I mean, there he says, I foresee a degree of poverty as my lot, right? How can you be more explicit than that? To say, you know, that's the life he chooses. So why would he be depressed about it? Yvonne says he sought suffering as a path to where he wanted to go. I think what confuses people is that people see that he was this troubled artist who led a difficult life and a life filled with poverty, despite all these efforts, right? Instead of that he chose this life of struggle and so on, and put in so much effort. There's a big difference between that. People seem to think that this life happened to him or was foisted upon him, whereas he chose it over and over again. Well, that's a great thing to see. Tommy Coyote says, my understanding of Vincent van Gogh was totally wrong, and my eyes have certainly been opened here. Well, if that's the case, then you might want to read my book on him as well, because you might have some more eye-opening if you're interested. Yeah. And, no one can say this better than Van Gogh, is to say, this is who I am, this is what I want, this is what I'm going for. And so no one can be more articulate on who Van Gogh is than Van Gogh. Van Gogh's own words. So you can have all these art experts pontificating and whatever, but the best person to tell us who Van Gogh is Van Gogh, right? And that's why the documentary Painted with Words is so good, because the entire thing, the entire sort of dramatization is his letters read out, and it's just put together in a really good way. Let's go back to that for a moment.
Despite the difficulties at home, it was around this time Dutch painters Anton Mauve and Joseph Israels celebrated for their peasant paintings and their grey and brown palette. Very different from the revolutionary Impressionist paintings which Theo had written to Vincent about.
So I think that is again a fantastic insight, where Vincent is very much in almost a romantic way attracted to this Dickensian idea of a peasant or a pilgrim. He wants to live this. He wants to live alongside the peasants. He wants to feel the rush of life through their hardship. He wants to feel the way that they press their shoulders against the plow and just get that sense of sweat and soil and sun, right? He wants to get that sandy sense of the farmer's lot, right? In terms of melees, sown, and all that kind of thing. And as a result, he's attracted to peasant-like people, whether it is in the farmyard or whether it is a weaver. And at the same time, he's becoming peasant-like in his bearing, in his clothing, in his relationships to some extent. But what he doesn't realize is you can have that affiliation without it being dark and without it being, what's the word, bound to the farmyard, and without it being stuck in a sort of tradition. And so a lot of artistic tradition. And so a lot of what Van Gogh is raging against here, where he's trying to explain how I'm not my father, and I can't abide all of these clergymen and their rules. What he doesn't realize is also to some extent raging against what is going to become him breaking away from an artistic tradition as well. So although he's headed towards the potato eaters, he's eventually going to graduate beyond that into these colorful explosions and these energetic expressions, right? All of that is being generated right now in the situation that he's in, but it's only going to come to fruition much later on. I just want to thank Axie. Axie, thanks very much. Myself, a creature with feelings of gratitude for you, Nick, and this wonderful group. Well, I'm really glad you guys are getting value and meaning out of it. I really appreciate that. Okay, so let's continue with this letter. So he says, and I see those same brothers in earlier years when you had just entered the art world, had just begun to read, etc., near the Rijswijk Mill, or for example, on a winter outing to Charm across the snowy heath early one morning. So here is a little bit of Van Gogh starting to remember what he sees, starting to remember the landscape, starting to remember that he's a painter, starting to have those impulses resonate, and he's starting to repeat them, right? He says, feeling, thinking, and believing the same to such an extent that I ask myself, can those be the same too? The question is, what will the outcome be? Will they separate forever, or will they take the same path once and for all? I tell you, I am choosing the said dog's path. I am remaining a dog. I shall be poor. I shall be a painter. I want to remain human in nature. So there again, if you thought, oh, that was just a random comment that he made and he didn't really mean it, right? There again, Van Gogh is confirming that I'm choosing this life of difficulty. I'm choosing this life of suffering, right? I know what I'm doing, right? I'm doing this consciously. And to his credit, what he's trying to say is that I want to be a human being. I want to paint people. I want to paint the world in a way that cuts to the core of who we are, right? And I don't want to be an artist full of airs and graces. I don't want to be some kind of snobby, I don't want to do the PR. I want to get my hands dirty and I want to figure this out, right? I've got this classic education, but I want to kind of plumb the depths of the human condition. And I don't mind getting sweat on my face, and I don't mind my legs hurting from walking there. And I don't mind, the graft that's involved. The graft sounds like the wrong word. Just the, what's the word? The effort that's involved. I'm willing to pay the price. I'm willing to do the work. He goes on to say, to my mind, anyone who turns away from nature, whose head is forever filled with thoughts of keeping up this and keeping up that, that's like appearances and belonging to a class, right? He's saying, I don't have energy for that. I'm going to throw all of that away. I want to focus on the sort of something magical that comes, that speaks out of, where you see a person bent over a plow, or a person digging in a vegetable garden. I want to see something deeply meaningful in that, something that is part of the classical human condition, right? That's what I want to do. And to do that, I need to be tuned into that. And I can't do that if I'm, like driving a Mercedes Benz kind of thing. That's, jumping a bit out of it, but you know what I'm talking about. He's trying to say, I want to hold on to my human nature. And he says, and again, just a reminder that this is why he's at odds with his father, because his father is doing the opposite. His father is saying, this is the class we belong to. These are the codes of behavior. These are the rituals and the the sort of cultural artifacts that we're going to hold true to. Whereas Vincent's saying, I don't want to be legalistic about this. I want to be humanistic about this, right? Meep says, did Vincent ever go into opium dens? I think he did in All with his pal Gorgar, and probably in Paris as well with his brother. Then he goes on to say, to my mind, anyone who turns away from nature's head is filled with thoughts of keeping up this and keeping up that, even if that should remove him from nature to such an extent that he cannot help admitting it. Oh, going on like that, one so easily arrives at a point where one can no longer tell white from black, and one becomes the precise opposite of what one is taken for or believes oneself to be. Now, I put up a poll where I said to you guys, Tommy, Vincent drank quinine, which is like got a huge amount of alcohol content. It's really a nasty drink, and that definitely had an impact on him. So it's not just alcohol; it's actually quinine. So in the poll, let's just have a look at where that poll is at the moment. 75 of you have voted. If you haven't voted, make sure you do. Who is the most creative artist? Vincent van Gogh. Now, think about that question and what he's saying here. I mean, it makes me think of Elvis singing, I ain't nothing but a hound dog, right? Thinking about a dog. And Vincent saying, I'm a dog, right? Except Vincent, I think, really believed it. Think about Elvis living in Graceland, this big mansion. Think about Michael Jackson living in Neverland, right? Also a big kind of mansion. Vincent really never had his own house except the yellow house, which he didn't have for very long, and I think he rented it. But the thing I want you to think about is all three of these artists died prematurely, right? And if you think about it, which ones of these artists got lost and which ones didn't, right? Just think about that. Between Elvis, Michael Jackson, and Van Gogh, which artist got lost in whatever you want to say, excess or whatever, and which ones didn't? I think it's an interesting question. Absinthe. What did I say? Yeah, absinthe. That's it. But anyway, got a very high amount of alcohol. So then he says, for instance, at present, you still have a manly fear of mediocrity in the worst sense of that word. Why then, in spite of that, are you going to kill, to extinguish the best in your soul? Quinine. Did I say quinine? I just want to... What made me think of that? That definitely is absent. But quinine is part of the Van Gogh story as well. So I'm not quite sure what that's all about. But definitely absinthe, that was the worst sort of substance that I think he took. Yvonne says Elvis and Michael definitely lost at the end. Yeah. Yeah, it is absent. Yeah. Quinine is what he had at the hospital. Okay, so then he says, by complying with and conforming to one thing today and another tomorrow as the world dictates, by never contradicting the world and by heeding public opinion. Now, what's incredible about this statement is that Van Gogh seems to be like like this, what's the word? Like a scoundrel dog that is sort of running around the neighborhood, unwanted, annoying, and not a particularly valued creature. And yet what he's saying is so absolutely true in terms of his own life. I mean, he's going to become world famous, and all these people around him, simply by them writing to him and by him mentioning them, they're going to become somewhat well known. But he's ultimately right in his arguments, in the sense that he becomes an exceptional human being. His art legacy becomes world famous and changes the world in a way. And he didn't do that by complying with his folks or by conforming to whatever they wanted. He did it by being his own person, by being authentic, by standing up to them, by being the shaggy dog, right? By being uncomfortable, by not doing as the world dictates, but by having his own inner directedness, right? By not caring what the world thinks, but not in a nasty way, just in a way of what I'm doing means something and I know it and that's good enough for me, right? By not needing public opinion. He says, do not misunderstand me. What I'm trying to say is that basically you are better than that. I see this when, for example, you take Father's part once, you think I've made things difficult for Father. If I might say so, to my mind, your opposition in that case is misdirected. I do appreciate what you're doing. And I say, do be more sensible, direct your anger elsewhere, and fight with the same strength against other influences than, of all things, mine. And then you will probably be less upset. So you get the sense that Theo has been quite upset by all of this. I don't mind Father when I consider him on his own, but I do mind him when I compare him with the great Father Malay, for instance. His doctrine is so great that Father's way of thinking looks extremely petty by comparison. Now you will think this is terrible of me, and I can't help that. It is my deep conviction, and I confess it freely, because you confused Father's character with Corot's, for instance. How do I see Father? As someone with the same kind of character as Corot's father, but Father is nothing of Corot himself. So without being funny, what I think is quite important and powerful to think about here is what you have here is 30-year-old Van Gogh standing up in a way to his father. This is in a letter to his brother, but more to the point, his psychology is standing up to his father's psychology. And bear in mind, someone who believes in God and someone who's a pastor, that is a powerful psychology, no two ways about it. But Vincent has built up, is generated, self-generated, in fact. Because Vincent also studied theology. He's built up, he's generated, he's designed his own psychology. It's his own. It's a unique psychology that does stand on its own 2 feet. And this is what these letters are all about, is that what I'm saying makes sense. What I'm saying is my truth and my choice, right? And I'm going to stick to it and I'm going to stand up for it, whether I'm living with Dad or not, kind of thing. But there is, to some extent, a sense of the father becoming, usurped by the son, in the sense that that is what Vincent does need to do. There's a scene in the movie Superman where Superman says something like, and the father will become the son, and the son will become the father, right? This is the moment where Vincent, the son, achieves a sense of, he becomes his own father, if that makes sense. He's no longer satisfied to be told what to do. He is now inner directed. He's not being outer directed. He's not being directed by society or by parents or by class. He's inner directed, which is quite an astonishing thing to reach. Anyway, he goes on to say, anyway, Corot loved his father but did not follow him, right? He loved his father, but he did not follow him. I love father too, so long as my path is not made too difficult by differences of opinion. I do not love father at the moment. How's that for, Vincent, just tell it like it is. I do not love father at the moment when a certain petty-minded pride stands in the way of the most generous and satisfactory accomplishment of a complete, permanent, and most desirable reconciliation. I had no intention whatever of putting you or father to expense by the steps I had in mind when I came back home. On the contrary, I wanted to use the money to better advantage. Now, what is also incredible about this moment is Vincent is relying on his brother and to some extent his parents because he has no job, and he's not sort of pussyfooting. He's not trying to suck up to them. He's not trying to manipulate them by saying what they want to hear so that he has his way. He's making his life pretty hard for himself, but he's being himself. And I think that is ultimately what Theo does come to know, love, and respect about his brother, that there is some incredible courage in this route, this path that his brother is taking. He goes on to say, we would lose less time, less money, and less energy. Am I to be blamed when I point to the Rappards who, although richer than father or you or I, manage things more sensibly and get better results from acting in concord, though it is probably not always very easy for them either? Am I to be blamed for wanting to put an end to the discord in the family with a thus far but no further? I think Vincent would have made a really good lawyer. I don't know what you guys think. I think he would have made a great lawyer because he can argue almost the inarguable in a way that's pretty compelling and convincing. Yeah, I did skip a year and a half of letters. I might come back to it at the end, though. He goes on to say, in what respect am I wrong for wanting this to be brought about thoroughly and conclusively, and for not being content with a sham or a too half-hearted reconciliation? Reconciliation with mental reservations, conditions, etc., bah, it just won't do, readily or not at all, with impressment, that's a French word for eagerness. Otherwise, it is absolutely useless and worse may be expected. So it's kind of saying something like, if Dad and I guess Mom as well, are going to reconcile, we need to do it fully or not at all. He goes on to say, you think it cowardly of me to rebel against father. So that's the second time that's come up. In the first place, this is a verbal rebellion. No violence is involved. Again, quite a great argument there. On the other hand, it might be argued that I am all the sadder and more disappointed, and I speak all the more gravely and resolutely, precisely because father's grey hairs make it evident to me that the time left to us for reconciliation is perhaps in truth not very long. I do not much care for deathbed reconciliations. I prefer to see them during life. So he goes on to say, I'm quite prepared to grant that father means well, but I should far rather it didn't stop at meaning well, but might for once lead to a mutual understanding, though it has been left very late. But I'm afraid it will never happen. If you knew how sad I think this is, if you knew how I grieve over it. Yeah, what I wanted to say here is there's this incredible. If you imagine Vincent van Gogh, if you imagine that scene where Benedict Cumberbatch is sitting beside the bed, he's on the floor beside the bed. He's a 30-year-old and he's got his arms around his knees, right? And he says, they treat me like a shaggy dog. What is so incredible is the guy that writes with such authority, such assertiveness, such intelligence is this guy. In other words, if you saw the letter, right, and you said, well, that's the guy who wrote it, you'd be dumbfounded. You'd be like, that guy, that dirty dog, that beastly, crude, piggish fellow, that guy with a dirty suit, that crude creature wrote that, right? That would be your sense of it. Tommy says the Van Gogh experience in Raleigh, North Carolina, less than 2 hours of me. I really have to go. Yes, you do. You do need to go to the Van Gogh experience. So he says, I'm quite prepared to grant that Father means well, but I should far rather it didn't stop at meaning well, but might for once lead to a mutual understanding, though it has been very late, left very late. But I'm afraid it will never happen. If you knew how sad I think this is, if you knew how I grieve over it. You say, Father has other things to think about. Oh, really? Well, to my mind, those things preventing Father from thinking matters through, year in, year out, are quite unimportant. And that is just the point. Father doesn't feel that there's anything to be reconciled about or to be made up. Father has other things to think about. Very well, leave him to his other things. I'm beginning to tell myself. Are you too sticking to your other things? Father says, we have always been good to you, etc. And I say, oh, really? You may be satisfied, I'm not. A lot of this discord is actually from the way they felt about Vincent's attitude to Key Voss. A lot of this is to do with Vincent's inappropriate feelings of love, right? He's grown up in a big sense because of that, because his feelings took him into a different dimension, if one can put it that way, right? And that is often how children graduate out of the family home, is they are lured or they are attracted by non-family members into different situations and different relationships. And that's how it's supposed to be, right? Often people who are, offspring who are attracted to someone purposefully like people that are going to upset their parents. They are trying to prove a point. Sometimes there's a delight in how shocked parents are, in those circumstances. I think there's a little bit of, not payback, but there's a bit of score settling in the discomfort parents experience when you have your way, based on the discomfort you experienced while you lived under their roof and they had their way, right? Okay, so then he goes on to say something better than the days of the Rijswijk Mill, namely the same thing but for good and all, two poor brother artists bound up in one and the same feeling. For one and the same nature and art, will it ever come to that? Or will this certain social position, there it is, the certain affluence win the day? And I must say, what makes me feel quite good about this, I didn't read this letter before the time. I just knew that there was a reference to the Shaggy Dog. And I don't think it's rocket science, but it was good to sort of nail it down to something sort of simple. And I feel like what I'm saying, he's saying, without having read it before doing this live. So I feel like I'm on his wavelength. Then he says, or will the certain social position, the certain affluence win the day? Oh, let them win it, but I foresee that it will only be for a while, that you will grow disillusioned with them before you are 30. And if not, well, if not then. Too bad. With a handshake, ever yours, Vincent. Then he goes on. I don't know if I'm going to deal too much with this postscript because it goes on forever, but it's just the same thing. He says there are ticklish questions to discuss. He talks about something he said to his father. He said, "It is like this. Pa, you are contradicting yourself. What you say militates absolutely against what you vaguely feel at your heart's core, even if you do not want to feel it. Theo, I stopped quarreling with Father wholly and completely long ago, because it is now clear to me that Father has never reflected upon certain very important things and never will reflect upon them, and that he clings to a system and does not reason, nor will he ever reason on the basis of the naked facts." Just those words make him sound like he would make quite a good lawyer. I don't think I'm going to read the rest of this sort of rant. He says, the least painter or man who wrestles directly with the naked truths of nature is more than you are. So you can tell from the length of these letters that he's feeling a lot, he's going through a lot, that there are gyrations taking place, soul searching, quarreling, struggling with an internal thing, right? He says, at this moment I feel within myself many repressed tears. He talks about my very grief, and I've suffered from them, but in my heart of hearts I no longer belong to that side of life. And then he signs off that postscript and then continues. He says, I've been here for 14 days and feel I've got no further than during the first half hour. That's got to be pretty frustrating. Had we understood each other better, we should have settled all sorts of things by now. I've no time to waste and must reach a decision. A door has to be either open or shut. I cannot see how there can be anything in between. It all ended with a little room at home where the mangle now stands, being put at my disposal for storing my bits and pieces, and if they need be, to use as a studio too. So this is a sign of some progress where he's now going to be living outside the house in a sort of outbuilding, and that's what's going to happen there. He says a start has been made with clearing the room, which had not been done while things were still in the air. He says, my opinion has softened. I respect old age and its weaknesses. Goes on and on and on. It was not primarily for selfish reasons that I tried to get them to open up the house to me again, even to give me a studio. What I do feel is that though we do not see eye to eye in many things, Father, you and I have the will to pull together, either all the time or by fits and starts. So there is some progress in how he's understanding this whole kind of conundrum. Tammy, do you want to come up? He says, our estrangement having already lasted so long, it can do no harm to place some weight on the other side, so that to the eyes of the world too, we do not look more divided than we actually are, so that to the eyes of the world, we do not seem to have gone to extremes. Rappard said to me, a human being is not a lump of peat, since a human being cannot bear being flung into a loft to be forgotten there. He pointed out that he considered it a great misfortune for me not to be able to live at home. And then the last paragraph, he says, one more thing, brother, at this time of your life, you would do well to reflect deeply on this. I believe you are in danger of taking a distorted view of a great many things. And I think you will have to examine your perspective on life very carefully, and that your life will improve as a result. I'm not saying this as if it was something I know and you do not. I'm saying it because I'm coming to see more and more how terribly hard it is to tell whether one is right or where one is wrong. So that is another pretty incredible way of finishing off this really long letter, is that he, at the end of all of this, he sort of thinks, wow, it's actually incredibly hard to tell whether what you're doing is right or wrong, right? Axie, good night. If you're leaving, yeah. Okay, so we are at 2 hours 54 minutes. I don't know if we can do another letter. I doubt it. 21st December. Yeah, this is again a pretty long letter. I hope the next letter is Christmas. Yeah, it looks like it's around Christmas. So we'll, I think, leave it at that. I am going to play you a little bit more from both those documentaries. I just want to remind you that a documentary came out in Australia. It's called A Shot in a Starry Night, and it deals with the cliche it says, Van Gogh was a difficult character, insecure, manic, extreme. The painter always lived and walked or worked on the border between genius and madness. Do you agree with that he was always on the border with madness? This madness drove him to suicide with a death wish. That's always been the thesis of experts, right? So that's how it opens up, and then it says, he wants to prove that Van Gogh did not shoot himself. Anyway, that is what this documentary is about. In other words, was the myth, was the madness true? What the experts have been telling us for so long, has it been true or not? Yeah. So anyway, that is a documentary that came out in Australia. I haven't been able to watch it yet, but if you're in Australia, maybe you can. So I'm going to put a link to this in the description. Not the description, in chat. For those of you in Australia, you can maybe see if you can try and locate that. Do you guys want to watch a little bit more of the documentary? Do you want me to? Yeah, it's a great point from Stephanie. You know, have the experts actually taken time to read these letters? Have the experts taken time to try and get to know Vincent van Gogh? I mean, you know, have you taken the time, taken the trouble, put in the effort? Doesn't look like it. So I'm going to play you just another little clip from this, and then we'll go to the other one. This is from The Power of Art. You guys ready? I know the sound is quite soft in this one. So that is the art that he wants to do. He doesn't want to draw peacocks prancing around, you know, sort of high society people. That is the human condition that he is interested in. That's the meaning that means something to him, that he wants to represent, right? And that is one of the reasons why Van Gogh ultimately becomes kind of the people's artist, is because that is who he ultimately strives to be. He strives to understand who we are from the inside, not from the outside, right? And obviously, the potato eaters, we're not there yet. That is the end of the journey that we're starting now in terms of the Nuenen period, right? So he's got the psychological apparatus in place to come up with that masterpiece. What he doesn't have yet, I guess, is the confidence, and what he doesn't have yet is the centeredness to kind of put it all together. He doesn't have the stability, and that is something he's going to be knitting together through his family, but also through his other explorations. He's going to be embarking on other artistic journeys before he gets there, and also possibly having affairs with some of the locals as well. That's going to help him get him where he needs to go, right? So that's that one. Now let's go to this one.
When the weavers weave.
Okay, so I've got to tell you, this part to me, just as a, I'm from a family of artists, but just also as someone who loves color myself. When I've sketched and made art myself, it's been extremely colorful, and I don't know, just for other reasons as well. I don't want to spoil the moment before we get to it, but this just presents a really exciting breakthrough for Vincent. As I say, it happens in the Nuenen period, but it only really happens sort of later on. It's almost like somebody who drinks quite a lot, and then the wave of drunkenness only hits them much later, possibly because they've been eating something with the drink, and there's been some sort of layer of absorption, if that makes sense. But I'm really looking forward to dealing with the Weaver period. Again, we've got quite a lot of letters to get through. I want to get through all the letters that deal with him arguing with his family, because I think it's important to show how he deals with difficulty and fighting and arguing, and that he's got backbone and resilience, and he's able to argue his case in a clear, forthright, and non sort of spiteful way. I think a lot of other people in the situation would lose patience, lose their tempers, and say horrible things. And he argues in a very sensible way, right? Which once again throws water on this idea that he's mad and insensible, right? Just another reinforcement that he's a sensible fellow, right? He looks strange and he does strange things, but there's a method to all of that. There's a reason why he's doing that. So I hope you guys found this episode and this format interesting and useful. I didn't know whether the sound would work, because I do kind of what's the word, play with a few things, but it seems to have done the trick. But I wanted to just bring it a little bit more to life than I already have. So if I've succeeded in that, that's great. I do actually plan on doing another live, if you can believe it, on Gabby Petito, maybe in an hour or two from now. So those of you who aren't ready for bed, that should be quite a short live. I don't see it being more than half an hour to 45 minutes. I want to deal with the 13 Instagram posts that Gabby did in July. I might do it. Much later, but I sort of feel like I want to do it sooner rather than later. Yvonne says, always great to be in class. It's always great to have you, Yvonne. Terry says, what's your favorite color? It used to be blue, but I think it's green. I think green is my favorite color, especially a sort of a darker green. Yeah, kind of a rich green. Paddy says, we love every minute of these episodes. Thank you, Nick. Thanks a lot. Stephanie says, love this. Well, that means a lot to me. I know you've been away, so the fact that you've been here and enjoyed it, that's great to hear. So it was good to also have some ordinary subscribers participating. It was good to see some new names. Terry says, mine is cobalt blue. Terry, I think I stopped liking blue when I found out that blue is associated with idealism. And I sort of felt like, although I really like blue, I don't like the idea of being, even though I might be quite an idealistic person, I don't like the idea of being unrealistic. And it may also be that I like green because green is associated with life. You know, in certain parts of the world, it is brown, it's tawny, it is sort of drab, and green is a sign of life. So maybe it's that as well. I mean, the entire Mars is no green, you know. So yeah, Stephanie says, I love teal. Yeah. Onesie says, Nick, this session was the one that made me realize what an incredible being Vincent was. Went to his museum in Amsterdam and did not like him at all. Thank you. Thanks, Onesie. Bridget says, green is my favorite too, nature. Yeah, I mean, the green when you walking through a forest and the leaves are doing that, you know, there's something pretty incredible about it. But I kind of feel like Karina, I also love so many colors, and it's not just a color, it's the way colors work together and the contrasts of colors. I used to not like red. I thought red was a very aggressive, in your face color, and then I started liking red, and I've got a red fire engine red bicycle that I really like. So one can also change. I mean, red is like the opposite of green, isn't it? Yvonne says, I love shades of orange. I think Vincent did too. I think Vincent also liked orange a lot. Terry says, my eyes are green. Okay. Yeah, okay, so thanks very much, guys. I'll see you guys again Wednesday for episode 25. Can you believe we had 25 episodes? And I want to thank the subs for dropping by. And obviously, if you enjoyed being part of the conversation, consider becoming a member. I want to thank the members for being here, and then also all of you for your super chats. Gathering Place, good to see you. Did I miss thanking any of you for super chats? Yvonne Phillips, that really means a lot to me, saying, love the added clips today. As always, a great pleasure to be here. Glad that this was a little bit of added value. I am trying to do my best and improve where I can. So I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it. Anyway, wherever you are, take care, stay safe. I'll see some of you guys when I do the Gabby Petito live. Otherwise, see you next time. All the best. Okay, ciao.